Good evening, and welcome to the Paso Robles City Council for Tuesday, December 6th. I am John Hammond, Mayor Pro Tem, sitting in for Mayor Martin. He's out sick tonight. We'll go ahead and start our meeting with the reading of the hybrid meeting, and City Clerk, Melissa, would you go ahead?
So the city has returned to hybrid public meetings pursuant to AB 361, which allows for a deviation from the teleconference rules required by the Ralph M. Brown Act. Residents now have the option to attend the meeting in person or to participate remotely. To participate remotely, residents can listen to the meeting live on the radio at 12:30 a.m. or live stream the meeting at www.prcity.com/YouTube and call 805-865-7276 to provide public comment via phone. The phone line will open just prior to the start of the meeting and remain open throughout the meeting to ensure the opportunity to comment on each item heard by the council. Written public comments can be submitted via email to cityclerk@prcity.com prior to 12 noon on the day of the council meeting to be posted as an addendum to the agenda. If submitting written comments in advance of the meeting, please note the agenda item by number or name. City council meetings will be live streamed during the meeting and also available to play later on YouTube by accessing the following link, www.prcity.com/YouTube.
Very good. And then we would go ahead and then start in with the Pledge of Allegiance. So if we can all stand and remain standing for Pastor Chris Cole. Chris Bausch will go ahead and give us the start.
Let's face the colors. Ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father God, as we approach your throne in prayer, we are reminded that we are all objects of your grace and goodness. We are thankful for all your blessings, including the civil freedoms we experience daily by being part of this nation and this community. We are reminded of the sacrifices made by so many to ensure that we have those freedoms. Yet, we must confess that too often we have taken those freedoms and blessings for granted. Too often we have given in to ingratitude, petty selfishness, and bitter division. We have too often failed to live up to our mutual responsibilities, even while demanding our rights. We've too often failed to remember the necessity of self-sacrifice, humility, compassion, and grace if we are to live consistently within the promised vision of our founding fathers. For these failures, weaknesses, and sins, we ask your forgiveness. We thank you that you use the actions of wise leaders to guide and bless our community. We ask that your blessing and wisdom be upon our mayor, council members, city manager, and city staff. We ask that you grant each of them wisdom and insight and skill as they seek to do good to and within this city, not only in tonight's meeting, but in their daily tasks. We pray for your continued economic blessing and recovery of our community. We ask that you bless each of our citizens with wisdom and humility to know how to care for each other even as we go about our daily lives. We thank you for the efforts and sacrifice of firefighters and police officers who protect our city and ask that you be a shield about them as they carry out their duties and keep vigilant watch over us. We ask that you grant everyone in tonight's meeting a spirit of humility that seeks to listen more than to speak, to care as much about the benefit of others as ourselves, and to lift up the weak and disadvantaged throughout our community. In all things, we surrender our will to yours, trusting that your providential hand and purpose is always good. We thank you for Jesus Christ, your true Son, true light in this dark world. May we find real joy and peace this season in him. Amen.
Amen. And City Clerk, can we call roll call, please?
Councilmember Bausch.
Present.
Councilmember Gregory.
Here on the Teams program.
Councilmember Hammond.
Here.
Councilmember Strong.
Present.
And Mayor Martin is absent this evening.
Very good. And we would like to have staff introductions, so maybe starting with Warren Frace.
Warren Frace, Community Development Director.
Melissa Boyer, City Clerk, joined by Shauna Howenstein, Civic Engagement Coordinator, and Karen Jackson, IT Technician.
Mary Sponholz, Deputy City Clerk.
For Lucko, Utilities Director.
Angelica Fortin, Community Services Director.
Paul Sloan, Economic Development Manager. Brian Brown, Administrative. William Brown, Interim Public Works Operations. Terry Van Pasadena. Chris Hewitt, Assistant City Manager.
Ty Lewis, City Manager.
Very good. Thank you. And do we have a city attorney online also?
Yes, we do, Mr. Hammond. Elizabeth Hall, City Attorney, and I'm joined by Isaac Rosen.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This is the time for general public comment. These are to be heard from the public on items that are not on the agenda tonight. You all have 3 minutes, so anybody wishing to bring anything forward to the board here, go ahead and make your way to the podium. Seeing none. Melissa, do we have anybody online? Okay, great. And City Manager Ty, do we have anything, agenda items to be deferred tonight?
There's one item on the agenda this evening, sir, that is Pioneer Park sale, and that item's been continued to December 20th. It's item number 9 on your
I
agenda.
would say that's number 9. Okay, very good. All right, now it brings us to the consent calendar. What I'd like to do is have our city manager go ahead and read the 7 items that we have on calendar for consent, and then we will take comment or pull anything from council and then bring it out to the public for any comment. So, Todd, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond. Item number 1 is the approval of the 11/15/22 City Council meeting minutes. Item number 2 is the approval of the 11/17 City Council special meeting minutes. Item 3 is the receipt of the warrant register. Item 4 is approval of the surplus property disposal. And I will take a moment to pause there and note to the council, you might notice that there's a new addition to all of our agenda items, which is a CEQA determination. And that will now be moving forward, will be on all of our agendas due to a recent court decision requiring that type of information. So for those in the audience that are following your agendas, you'll notice that throughout. So that was approval of surplus property for disposal. Item number 5 is approval of New York, New City Park event request, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. Formalizing an event that has been occurring with different groups, but it's now becoming a permanent event here at the City Park as of January 16th, 2023. Approval of purchase of a fleet replacement item, and this authorizes the city manager to purchase the replacement equipment listed within the resolution, fleet and equipment replacement program. Approval of the use of a septic system at 132 Burkett Place, which is a new single-family residence that requires a septic system. And that's all of the items on the consent calendar.
Very good, thank you. So I'll bring it back to council then. Do any of the council members have anything to pull or have any questions for?
No, I do not.
Good. Steve, Gregory, are you good?
I'm good. No comment. Thank you.
Okay. I'll bring it out to the public. Anybody wishing to pull an item or have questions on the consent items? Anybody online, Melissa?
No, sir.
Okay. All right, then we'll go ahead and call.
Motion to approve the consent calendar, items 1 through 7.
Second.
Okay, we have an item, motion for Councilman Bausch, second by Councilman Strong, to approve items 1 through 7. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bausch,
Aye.
Councilmember Strong,
Aye.
Councilmember Gregory,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Hammond.
Aye. Okay. Next is going to be public hearings. Item 8 is going to be the consideration of the urgency ordinance amending Title 21 of the Paso Robles Municipal Code relating to accessory dwelling units, ADUs, and junior accessory dwelling units. That's a new word. So I imagine, Warren, you're going to have this for us? Oh, yeah. Katie, go ahead, Katie.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Hammond. So my name is Katie Bannister. I'm an associate planner. So this is a new urgency ordinance related to accessory dwelling units. So just a little bit of background. Accessory dwelling units, or ADUs as they're often known, are full residential units. So these are units that have a kitchen, bathroom, full living facilities that are located on a lot with another residence. They are allowed in all zoning districts where residences are allowed. So in the single family zoning districts, our multifamily zoning districts, and also our mixed use zoning districts. There is a new classification of ADUs. It's been around for a few years, but junior ADUs are smaller than sort of a regular ADU. They are converted from existing space within an existing single-family residence. So you've got that ADU and then the junior ADU. Something important to remember is that while the City Council has set a cap on the allowed population of Paso Robles, we don't get to count ADUs towards our density that's allowed within the city. So that's by state law. So a little bit of history. The first mention of something that would resemble an accessory dwelling unit in the Paso Robles Municipal Code was back in 1983 when the city started allowing what were called senior housing units. There were some changes over the years to that program, but in 2003, there was a fairly large overhaul to allow what were called second units. And we went along with second units for a number of years. But then in 2016, the state of California renamed what was formerly known as a second unit into accessory dwelling units. The local ordinances, our local second unit ordinance has not actually been amended since 2005. So the state of California keeps changing the rules on accessory dwelling units. And since 2019, when there were quite a few significant changes to ADU rules, most of our local rules have not been enforceable. We have deferred to state law and used what state guidance that has existed. And then we've enforced our local ADU rules when they aren't in conflict with state law. But since 2019, we have been deferring to state law for the most part. So in 2019, significant changes to setbacks, to development impact fees, to the heights, and there was just a large number of changes in 2019 that were enacted on January 1 of 2020. And then in this year's legislative session, there were two ADU bills. They made refinements. These weren't as large as sweeping changes as we saw in 2019, but they did make refinements to the height that could be allowed for ADUs, some of the parking requirements, and then something new was enforcement of front setbacks. Up to this point, cities have been able to enforce our front setbacks, but there was some changes this year to that as well. So kind of the result of all the state's efforts and local efforts as well. The first time I could find data being pulled separately for ADUs as opposed to just residential units was back in 2017. We had 5 ADUs. They were called second units at the time. And in that year, we had 244 total residential units. And so that was just 2% of all the residential units in that year. Fast forward to 2019, we saw a big jump. And that was even before the new state rules were implemented. But then in 2020, you see there in red, that was the year where we started implementing a lot of new rules. And we were, in that year, we processed a total of 41 residential units, and 19 of those were actually ADUs. So almost half of all the residential units in 2020 were ADUs. Looking now to 2022, this year, of course, we've got a month left, but at this point, we've issued permits for 26 ADUs. We have issued permits for a total of 277 residential units. So it's a smaller portion, but we did have a fairly unusual project this year, the Creston Road apartments that are somewhat near the Food for Less grocery store. Those are 200 residential units. That's a fairly atypical year. So if we took out those Creston Road apartments, we still would have had almost 35% of all the residential units this year were ADUs. In addition to the 26 permits that we've already issued, we actually have 25 additional ADU permits either in the building permit review process or sitting waiting to be issued. These are ready. Someone just has to come and pull the permit for those. So 50 ADUs could potentially be issued this year. I doubt we'll get to the full 50, but still a substantial amount of the housing units that we're seeing in the city are ADUs. So jumping into the new standards, largely what we're doing this evening is adopting an ordinance that complies with state law, allows us to make refinements to state law. That's pretty limited what cities can do. The state has preempted most local control on ADUs, but we're providing standards that are specific to Paso Robles wherever we can. So there are kind of two classifications of ADUs. There are the building permit only, sometimes called statewide exemption ADUs, and they have really limited standards that the city can enforce. Essentially, we cannot preclude the development of an 800 square foot ADU. So we have to cede our setbacks, our height limitations, of lot coverage standards, a lot of standards in order to allow basically an 800 square foot ADU on almost any lot in town. There are kind of a second classification of ADUs, which is kind of everything else. So anything that's over 800 square feet, we can enforce objective design standards, and so this ordinance does include some of those. There are some setbacks that can be required. If the council is interested, we can certainly do a deep dive into all the standards, but this is a listing of kind of a general overview of what is in the ordinance that is specific to Paso Robles. Something to keep in mind for all accessory dwelling units, if the primary residence does not have fire sprinklers, we cannot make the ADU have fire sprinklers. That was a substantial change. I think it happened in 2019 that was seen as a hindrance to ADU production. The ordinance does preclude the use of ADUs that were permitted after January 1st of 2020, which is after the big changes in 2019. Those ADUs cannot be used as short-term rentals. That's been policy for the city since that time, but this would codify it and put it in the ordinance. The current second unit ordinance does not allow ADUs to be developed where septic is required. This would just require the ADU to go through the septic waiver process like we saw this evening for the house on Burkett. Any ADU would also have to go through that same process, which would bring it before the council to make sure it's an appropriate use of septic systems. JADUs do require owner occupancy on the site, and so if someone does a JADU, they have to live on the property. The California legislature did provide a specific carve-out for ordinances that implement California's ADU law. So this project is exempt from CEQA under Public Resources Code 21080.17. The council has options. The first would be to take no option. If the council does not act on this urgency ordinance, we would just defer to state code in all instances. We wouldn't have any local nuance to our ADU ordinance. Alternatively, you could adopt the urgency ordinance that is provided for you this evening, and you would be also making a finding that ordinance is exempt from CEQA. You could amend, modify, or reject the above options. Staff's recommendation is to adopt the urgency ordinance, which would repeal Chapter 21.16D and replace it with a new Chapter 21.78. And that concludes my report.
All right. Thank you, Katie. Questions of staff? Council? Yes.
I have a question, John. Is Steve, may I?
Okay, go ahead, Steve. I was going to let Fred go on. He was asking, but go ahead, Steve. Quick.
Okay. Sorry. Katie, so I've just got a couple clarification questions, if I may. So are we changing the maximum ADU size to 1,200 square feet now?
We've actually always allowed ADUs up to 1,200 square feet. There was a caveat about a certain percentage of the floor area that we hadn't really been enforcing. So all ADU, well, not junior ADUs because they have a separate maximum size, but ADUs in general can be 1,200 square feet. If you do them smaller, you are entitled to some additional exemptions from our local ordinance.
So if you do them under 800 square feet, you're exempt from some of our fees, is that true?
So to be exempt from the development impact fees, you'd actually have to be less than 750 square feet. The state put a lot of different height thresholds, or excuse me, size thresholds that make it really confusing to explain to the public what you can and can't do and where fees are enforced and so forth. But 750 square feet for the fee exemption, 800 square feet for a statewide exemption ADU.
And then in your presentation, you showed a building with a Airstream. Was that Airstream an ADU?
No, our local ordinance does not allow RVs to be used as housing. That RV is actually parked in front of an ADU.
Okay. And then on the junior ADU, it talked about conversion of space. Does that include actual garages or only existing parts of houses for conversion?
Yes, you can convert an existing garage into either an ADU or a junior ADU. Kind of a nuance, if you convert the garage into a junior ADU, the city can make you replace the parking that is in that garage. If you convert a garage into a regular ADU, we cannot make you replace that parking.
Okay, and this is kind of a technical question. With a lot of the new building developments coming up or coming in, they're going to have smaller ADUs with their residences. Will those ADU counts also not be counted?
So they would not count towards the maximum allowed density in that development. That's correct.
Okay. And is that standard under 1,200, under 800, or under 750? Just a question.
No ADU can count towards a population cap or a housing units count, a cap within a municipality.
Okay, great. And then is it allowable for an ADU to have an attached garage?
Yes, they can.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. It's a lot to cover. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Councilman Strong?
Yes, thank you. When we originally adopted the ADU ordinance, they weren't allowed to have kitchens. Is that still true in both cases, in ADUs and junior ADUs, or is it differentiated between them?
So there is actually a nuance in the zoning ordinance that allows for guest houses. Guest houses actually can't have kitchens, whereas senior housing units and junior second units and accessory dwelling units have always been allowed to have kitchens. It's the guest house that cannot have the kitchen.
Only the guest house. Okay. And you're saying none of these units will count toward arena numbers then?
You actually can count, our current housing element allows ADUs to count towards, I believe it's our moderate units. So we can't count it, it doesn't count towards our sort of build out projection for the city, but it can count towards our arena numbers. I've been made to understand from our consultant that we were kind of lucky to get HCD to acknowledge that, but we can use our ADUs of certain sizes to count towards arena. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Questions? Councilman
I do. Thank you. So on the deed restriction, if somebody pulls and applies for it and receives a permit to build an ADU, do they have to build in order for that deed restriction to be enforced, or could they sell that as entitled property to a future owner to build the ADU?
So we do not, and we've been requiring deed restrictions for a few years now. We do not issue the building permit until we have received the signed deed restriction. We make sure that we've recorded it before the building permit finals, but we have to have it in hand before we'll issue that permit.
So let me ask it a different way. If a property owner applied for, received, went through all that, something came up, they had to move, they could still sell that, and the permit would still be valid and incumbent upon the subsequent owner.
Typically, you can. There's some nuance with that if you. The previous designer has a copyright on their plan, so there's some nuance, but yes, and the deed restriction runs with the land. So right. If one owner puts that deed restriction, each subsequent owner is subject to that restriction.
Thank you. And then lot lines, these are still 0 lot lines if approved. I mean, that would be possible.
So the standard is a 4-foot setback for ADUs. If there is an existing non-conforming structure, there's a lot of structures on the west side of Paso Robles, in particular garages built right on the property line. State law says that we have to allow those to either be converted to ADUs or actually to be completely demolished and rebuilt to the same dimension as that previous garage right there at that non-conforming setback, but in general 4 feet.
But only if there's a pre-existing condition.
That's correct, okay. Yeah.
That's the clarification. Thank you. Street parking, and I'm kind of confused. If there was a garage, now you have to have parking. You don't have to have parking. Can you clarify that a little bit for me?
Sure. So what's known as and what's in the ordinance as a building permit only ADU, I believe in none of those circumstances can the city require any additional parking for the ADU. The most parking that we can require for an ADU is 1 space, but there are a number of exemptions. One of the main ones that gets applied is if you're within a half a mile walking distance of a transit stop, we can't require any parking. I'm not sure if this is what you were asking about if you convert a garage into a junior ADU, the city can require you to replace that parking. So you wouldn't necessarily have to provide parking for the ADU, but you would have to provide parking for the single family residence. But we are limited in the new parking we can require associated with ADUs.
Okay, thank you. And then I think that's my last, two questions. You had a slide that had the short-term rental after January 1st, 2020. Was there a size restriction on that? It was on the 1,200 square foot slide, but does that also apply to the 800 square foot?
Yes, it applies to all ADUs. So the state requires, in 2019, that was one of the things they added to state law. We're giving all these exemptions, fee exemptions, parking exemptions, lots of things. This is all intended to provide more housing. And so these units
housing
are not intended to be short-term rentals.
Okay, great. And then since this is gone, I don't need an answer tonight, just something maybe to keep in mind down the road to provide to council. Statewide comparison of what cities are doing a good job of actually turning this into a positive use that it was intended for. I looked very, very quickly this afternoon. I probably didn't dig hard enough or fast enough, but I'm sure there's some kind of statistics out there on how that's coming along across the state.
Yeah, so it should be knowable. Each city has to report to HCD each year their housing production. So I haven't dug in to find those numbers, but they should be knowable. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Katie. My questions I had here was junior, new word to me. I've never really quite seen that before. So distinction is that have to be attached to the main house, or can it be separate and distinct from the house?
No, it actually has to be carved out of existing space within a single family residence, and it's maximum size of 500 square feet. Right. The classic would be to take a master bedroom suite and throw in an efficiency kitchen and kind of block it off from the rest of the house, and now you've got a unit. That's kind of a typical junior ADU. So in single family zones, you can actually do both an ADU and a junior ADU. You could do 3 units on a single family zone lot. The owner does have to live on the property in order to do the junior. But
that was my other thing I wrote down, that to classify it as a junior, the owner has to be on the property too.
That's right.
All right, got it. One thing that kind of tickled me there a little bit was the ADU water. Apparently, the use of water for an ADU does not count toward our build out. And how does that work into our projections for water? Is that going to throw that off, or? I mean, we have plenty of water, I understand, know that, but I'm just curious, why the state did that when they're so sensitive to water use right now.
Housing has been deemed to be, an emergency situation. I don't know if Warren or Christopher want to comment on, long-term projections with ADUs, because we are seeing a lot of production of them, and we don't get to count them. It's
exactly, that's a question I think we should at least discuss.
Yeah, I think, like Katie said, the state's elevated this issue above all the other issues. So issues with traffic, parking, water that are associated with residential development. The state's basically said they've taken those issues off the table and just said you're going to build ADUs regardless. We still, as an organization, we're still going to have the impacts of those issues. So we're going to have to figure out how to deal with them. You just can't pass those costs onto those ADU units. So the rest of the community is going to have to absorb those costs somehow.
And that was my third question, guys, because again, I guess it has to do with square footage and then where we could trigger to charge development impact fees, like less than 500, you said. Beyond that, then we can start doing certain charges for fees, or is it full bore on what we typically do?
It is a proportional amount, the fees that we charge, the development impact fees. So any ADU 750 square feet or larger, I believe they currently pay $8 a square foot.
I see.
Mm-hmm. And also water and sewer. Typically, we don't do a separate water meter or sewer connection, but there are times when the ADU does trigger the need for a larger meter. And so in those circumstances, we can charge an upgrade fee for the meter, but in general, we don't get, collect a fee for.
Which also equates to more sewage fees on the backside of that too, right? Got it. Okay. Any other questions from council? Steve, you good? Okay.
I'm good. Thank you, John.
Oh, Christopher has one. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. So this is an urgency ordinance. If we don't pass this before the end of the year, the state rules take over January 1st. And there's very, very little rules where almost anything goes, it looks like, on the state side of things. So we have to do something. If not this, we have to do something before the end of the year.
We don't have to. This ordinance doesn't have a huge amount of nuance. There are some things, and the staff would encourage you to pass this ordinance. We do intend to bring a regular ordinance to you in the not too distant future to provide all the nuance we would like to be in the RADU ordinance.
Okay. So this is still a work in progress, it sounds like. Thank you.
Okay. Then I'll go ahead and turn it out to public comment. Anybody wishing to address the council on this item, please come forward. And Madam Clerk, do we have anybody online?
No, sir.
Okay. Then I'll bring it back to council for discussion and or action.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. This looks like it's really not going to affect us very much, even in fact, it has to be carved out of existing space. That space already can accommodate that same number of people if the family is a large family. So it just allows maximum utilization of the space. That's about all it really accomplishes. So I would make a motion here to, where is my recommendation? Right down here. To adopt urgency ordinance XXXX, amending Title 21 zoning of the Paso Robles Municipal Code relating to ADUs and JADUs, and finding that the ordinance is exempt from CEQA under Public Resources Code 21080.17.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Councilman Strong, second by Councilman Bausch. Roll call, Melissa?
Councilmember Strong?
Aye.
Councilmember Bausch?
Aye.
Councilmember Gregory?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Hammond?
Aye.
Let the record show that the motion carried 4-0. And to update the record on the consent calendar roll call vote, that one also carried unanimously 4-0.
Very good, thank you. All right, moving on, then number 9 has been deferred to another date. And then we'll go to discussion items then. Item 10 is the approval agreement for Cal Poly Corporation for preparation of Federal Aviation Administration Spaceport License application. And Director Sloan has the report.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem Hammond and council members. My name is Paul Sloan, Economic Development Manager for the City of Paso Robles. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present on this subject this evening. I'd like to give a bit of background and overview, as it's been a while since I presented it before council, but also for people in the public listening in. So for this project, the background of it is an economic development diversification project. Our economy's key pillars are wine and tourism, among others. And so it's very important that we will continue to support those key pillars of our economy. But the initiative is to work to diversify our economy for greater economic stability, but also to work to attract higher paying head of household jobs to our community. And so in that frame, we have been looking at the technology sectors in ag tech and med tech, as well as space tech. And with the emergence of the Central Coast space economy between Vandenberg Space Force Base to the south of us and Silicon Valley to the north of us with the high concentration of space tech companies, and with Cal Poly, with his prestigious aerospace engineering program right in our backyard. In April of last year, Mayor Martin tasked Airport Commissioner Bill Britton, who's here in council chambers this evening, and myself to explore the potential to obtain, using existing infrastructure from the city's airport, to obtain an FAA spaceport license specifically for small platform horizontal launch delivery vehicles. So spaceport licenses are issued by the FAA. And so one of the first things that we did was have high-level conversations with the FAA about the project, and they were very positive and encouraged us to continue on this project. A bit about spaceports. There are currently 14 commercial spaceports in the U.S. When we began this project, there were 12. In December, Georgia was given a spaceport license, and in May of this year, Huntsville, Alabama got a spaceport license. So today there are 14. As you can see, there's only one in California, in fact, on all of the West Coast, and it's down in the Mojave. As just a point of reference, there are over 19,000 airports in the U.S., and so with the ever-growing importance of space, there's obviously room for growth here. What we always tell folks we're not talking about are big rockets blasting off. We always remind folks, because this is what space has been since the 60s and continues to be, with what's called vertical launch vehicles, and these will continue at Cape Canaveral and Vandenberg and other places. What we are talking about are next generation launch platforms called space planes, and much like an airplane is designed to fly in the air, the space plane is designed to take off from a conventional runway in what's called a horizontal launch, fly up to low Earth orbit, deploy its payload, and then come back down and land back on the runway horizontally. And the payload that they are delivering are what are called CubeSats or small sats. In the picture to the left, you see Mayor Martin and Commissioner Britton holding full-scale CubeSats. This is down at the CubeSat lab down at Cal Poly's Aerospace Engineering Department, and Cal Poly has provided us with an actual CubeSat. It was on display here at the library over the summer. It's currently out at the airport. The airport manager has it, and he's working on a display case to have it on display with information boards in the lobby of the airport, so when folks are waiting for their table at one-nighter diner, they can learn about CubeSats. What a lot of folks didn't know until we started talking about it was that the CubeSat standard was actually invented down at Cal Poly down in the back of the 90s, and it became a bit more well-known earlier this year when the CubeSat standard that was founded at Cal Poly was inducted into the Space Technology Hall of Fame. The CubeSats were originally designed or created for academic purposes because they're easier and less expensive to produce, but today the vast majority of CubeSats and small sats are for commercial purposes. These are the stats from 2021 of all the launches that went up last year. 94% of the satellites were in the small sat category. We often talk about what goes up into space, but sometimes we need to focus on what the utilizations are here back on land. So I put this in there. This was something, an article that came out in October, how John Deere had launched an RFP, a request for proposal, for satellite communications to be putting into their farm equipment. So satellites, CubeSats, are used for communications and water monitoring and crop management. And John Deere's equipping their farm equipment with satellites, and so that they can optimize what they do to continue helping us feed the planet. Space planes, there are several dozen companies actively working on developing space plane technology, companies around the world. The one in the middle and the bottom is in the UK, in the lower right-hand corner is based in New Zealand and the Netherlands, and the upper right-hand corner is up in Canada, and then there are a number here in the US. The appeal of the space plane model is that unlike vertical launches, in a vertical launch, it's basically a one-use vehicle, and so they're working to reuse parts of it, essentially build a new rocket every time. Whereas with the space plane, it goes up, it delivers its payload, it comes back down, and you don't have to build a new space plane every time. You pay for fuel and the service, and the cost of operations can be reduced by as much as 90%. Just a little update, upper right-hand corner is a company called Space Engine Systems. It's based in Alberta, Canada. That was one of the first companies that Mayor Martin and Commissioner Britton and I spoke with when we were meeting with these companies. And last week they announced that their prototype will begin flying in the first quarter of 2023. So they've already incorporated in the US a US subsidiary, and they have what's very common in space plane companies, a point-to-point model, where they plan to operate 4 or 5 different spaceports. Let's say you take off in Florida, land in Texas, take off in Texas, land in California. And so one thing we offer, which they'll be interested in, would be a West Coast footprint for commercial space launches. In the lower right-hand corner is Dawn Aerospace, which is a definite leader in this area. And their prototype began flying in August of last year and has completed over 48 missions. And their next prototype with an enhanced propulsion system will begin also flying in the first part of 2023. Folks often ask how big these things are. So as a point of reference, this is the Dawn Aerospace space plane. It measures 16 feet long, fully loaded with fuel and cargo, weighs about 800 pounds. And when it's empty, a couple people can push it around on a dolly. So that's a space plane. Interestingly enough, Dawn Aerospace, it's not their main line of work is making space planes. It's actually green propulsion systems for small sats. So the small CubeSats, when they're launched out of however they're delivered by SpaceX or whatever, they have these little tiny rocket engines on them, which allow the CubeSats to autonomously position themselves in the weightlessness of space. And Dawn Aerospace, they do green propulsion. They're very successful at it for small sat propulsion systems. And by creating a very economical, reusable launch platform of a space plane, then more satellites can be launched, which makes a bigger market for selling propulsion systems for CubeSats. We're very fortunate. Dawn Aerospace came and visited us in October, and they went down, they visited Cal Poly, and this is a visit to the engineering department. And when you have over 50 engineering students come out on a Saturday morning voluntarily, you know that this is an attraction for them as well. So there were, the gentleman speaking there is one of the co-founders. He's based in the Netherlands, and he brought one of his folks from New Zealand and someone from their New York office as well. And then students from Cal Poly gave them a tour of the propulsion lab as well as the machine shop, so that the Dawn Aerospace folks could see the learn by doing motto of Cal Poly in practice. One thing that is very important for us when we talk about business attraction is that companies will be interested in the talent pipeline. They don't want to put a company somewhere and then have to pay to relocate people, whereas they saw firsthand that the talent pipeline begins at Cal Poly, and the students then go off and work everywhere else, but they're already here. So for companies that we bring in technology with the 14 or 15 different types of engineering degrees that Cal Poly produces every year, we're very fortunate to have the talent pipeline right in our backyard. A little bit about the project overall. We began a dual-track parallel path. In the upper right-hand corner of the triangle area is the airport, which is where we're working to potentially obtain a spaceport license. The purple line outlines an area we're calling the Tech Corridor, which is adjacent to the airport property. And this is where essentially we would have the business attraction activities going with various developments. In the lower left-hand corner is Quest College North County campus, who's interested to work with us on technical training programs for workforce development. As you move to the right, across Wisteria Lane, there's the Paso Commons development of a business park out there. Up the new airport road in development, there's some other areas there for developing commercial industrial space. And then bookending up at the landing project, the old boys school. As well, there are other developments areas out there, all of which will be great for bringing in potential businesses as these business commercial parks come into fruition. The project over the time frame has garnered lots of support, including from our own Chamber of Commerce, as well as receiving a letter of support from REACH, which is the Regional Economic Action Coalition, which is a regional economic development organization which covers Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo County. Also, in addition to letters of support, we have letters of intent, which is companies actually intending to do business here. So just to talk about a couple of the folks here, we have here Stellar Exploration, similar to Dawn Aerospace, makes little tiny rocket propulsion systems for small sats. And there's a project that launched about 6 months ago from New Zealand as a NASA project called Capstone. And it entered lunar orbit on November 13th. And it is currently orbiting the moon, and the propulsion system is from Stellar Exploration. So that's the kind of folks that we're in communication with. UARX is our first European letter of intent. The two co-founders, they're based in Spain. The two co-founders both have PhDs in aerospace engineering, but interestingly enough, they both got their master's degrees at Cal Poly. So they absolutely love the area. They know Paso very well, and the two co-founders are huge fans of Paso Zinfandel. A little bit more bragging about them. Both of these were actually in the news today, so I just threw them in. On the left, UARX, they're very involved with the European space, and so they're in Berlin. The gentleman on the right is Andres Villa, who was here. He met with Councilman Hammond when they visited the airport in April. But here they were selected as the winner in Germany for the micro-launcher payload competition they have up there. So they're very involved across Europe. And on the right-hand side, Dawn Aerospace today announced having another $20 million in funding. So this is an example of the types of companies that are attracted to the project that we have here. It's really the cutting edge of the next generation of commercial space. By far, the most important letter of intent, though, was the one that was signed in April between Mayor Martin and President Jeffrey Armstrong of Cal Poly, where the city would partner with Cal Poly in developing our program going forward. In August, Cal Poly, a division of the Cal Poly called the Digital Transformation Hub, the DX Hub, presented a proposal with these three work streams. The first of which is and this is the reason we're here this evening, is the budget for this proposal. The FAA license application is the first work stream, and the license has several steps, the first of which is sending in a pre-application to the FAA to tell them what type of license we'd like to apply for, which we did. And then the city, following that, commissioned a preliminary technical review with Tartaglia Engineering, who found the project to be doable, no fatal flaws in the plan. And following that, we've moved to the point where we now have to do the full FAA license application, which is highly technical, which is why we will need technical expertise. And this is where we could work with Cal Poly using their aerospace engineering faculty as well as students. And from what I understand, the students are lining up to be part of this project because who doesn't want to have spaceport on your resume when you graduate? Additionally to that, in the second work stream is working on the space industry ecosystem mapping. That's sort of the tech corridor area, the types of businesses and industries we could work to attract. And Cal Poly is uniquely situated for that because those are all the companies where the graduates go and get jobs. So they have that little black book of addresses for those connections. And the third very important one is Cal Poly working with Cuesta on education and workforce development strategies such that we can develop engineering and technical training programs. And as well, we'd like to connect this down to the high school level such that we have a deep bench of a pipeline of talent, kids coming up from industrial arts or STEM or any technology interests. They can see a path forward. And I would like to also point out, we talk a lot about tech, but I went to business school, and business school, as everyone knows, you study about widgets because that can be anything, and you have to product, price, place, and promotion, right? And when you're going to build a company, if you happen to be selling lucrative, high-value widgets like satellites, you're still going to need an accounting department, you're still going to need human resources, you're still going to need marketing and communications. So the ecosystem brings in all these other jobs. So it's not just people who are engineers. So it's important for folks to know that when we bring this, the core business might be that, but it has all these other things that come with it, including all the stuff we'll need like legal and financial support from banking. This proposal here, the three streams, is what's on the agenda this evening. The proposal from Cal Poly is just over $110,000 that you see. And what's interesting to note is that is less than 1/10 of the cost from proposals we received from other entities. So not only do we have the advantage of working with the prestigious university on this as a partner, but also the cost is significantly less than what we had originally thought based on estimates that the city had been given. We have with us this evening members of the team. We have Paul Jurison, who's here in council chambers, as well as Dr. St. John, who will be heading it up down at Cal Poly, and they'll be working with the various faculty consultants in aerospace engineering, etc. And they're available to answer any questions, things like that council may have. One final thing before I relinquish the microphone, just to put this in there because a few months ago, the state of California launched a new space industry task force because the state didn't actually have one before, which is interesting. And among their objectives, stated objectives, are attracting new businesses, including international businesses, growing California's workforce and providing more well-paying jobs, expanding research and development in aerospace and advanced manufacturing, building more testing and launch capabilities, working with California's higher education, and creating new models for public-private cooperation. All of which aligns perfectly with what the city of Paso Robles has been working on for the last year and a half. So we're in good company as the state moves forward in the space sector. And with that, we're happy to try to answer any questions, or if you'd like to hear from Mr. Jurison or Dr. St. John, they're here in council chambers as well. Thank you.
Council have any questions of Paul and or staff from Cal Poly?
Well, I'm anxious to hear a word or two from the staff of Cal Poly because they have two very interesting areas. And having been involved with the creation of a place now called Silicon Valley back in the early 60s myself, I see very many parallels. I'd like to briefly hear from you.
Yeah, Paul or whoever would like to address the council. You have to come up to so we can record it. Yeah.
First of all, we also have to say to Paul Sloan and the mayor because they brought the idea forward to us and with Bill Britton as well.
can we have your name real quick?
Oh, I apologize. I'm new to this. So my name is Elise St. John, and I work at the Digital Transformation Hub. My background's actually as an education policy researcher, and I have recently, in the last 3 to 5 years, become more involved in public-private sector sort of collaboration. So to answer your question, you know, if you think about Silicon Valley, there's Stanford University was a huge hub with regard to building out the ecosystems that exist. And so the parallels with regard to Cal Poly and what's happening here in the space industry, you know, you can draw the conclusions. I think, and Paul Sloan had just addressed the very important point too, that it's not just space. Space is a central feature of the work, you know, that's pulling us all together, and all the excitement from the international companies as well as from the students. But when we think about that work stream that we just shared with you, it's also the business students and the, you know, communication students and all the other, you know, project management skills that will be required too.
Okay. Okay. I had a question maybe for Bill, if you can come up. Bill Britton is an airport commissioner, and we're going to actually have a meeting Thursday night. So, Bill, when we first initiated this discussion, you know, engaging Cal Poly, my alma mater, I'm glad we got together on this. We were talking about maybe the second quarter of next year when we could complete it. In other words, within the school year. Is that still possible?
Yeah, we are still shooting for around the May timeframe. We had a really good conversation today with Dr. George Neild, who is a most recent new astronaut, former FAA lead for spaceports, and now runs Commercial Spaceport Association. His suggestion was finish as much as you can, as quick as you can, turn it in, start the dialogue. So he recommended we just fill in a couple pages, turn it in, and get going, so that the dialogue is between us and them. For a foregone conclusion, we will get a license. So we've been discussing that today as a result of that. So it could be earlier, not to put any pressure on.
Well, again, that's what I was kind of wondering, you know, that, and that this is student involved. Students are working on this.
We absolutely, students are involved. That's an important part of how we do business. We have a huge process that we put in play for the students to participate. We were actually backward engineering, so that our end state is the license turn in, and then all these other facets as well. But what's really cool, or not so cool, is we had 2 students that were working this project, both of whom have been hired away from us already by actual aerospace firms who hired them because they were working on spaceport. So we know that this is a need, and this is something that is out there. And as said, there were 50 plus in attendance at the meeting with Dawn Aerospace. Every one of them wants a job in that area. If they could get it in their backyard, imagine what could happen.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Yeah,
not so much a question, but just an observation. I think going forward, this is a great source of potential growth for Paso Robles in terms of not only spaceport type professions, but also all the peripheral jobs that Mr. Sloan mentioned. The parallel to Silicon Valley and Stanford, I want to make sure that staff and council keep in mind all of the other needs that are going to occur that should happen hopefully prior to, or at least in conjunction with the build out. When we get a timeline, we are going to be attracting additional professionals here. The cost of housing is almost out of reach for I would say probably almost 50% of our population. We start adding those kinds of salaries and those kinds of wages without having the infrastructure in place. I'm talking about roads and houses. We're going to turn into another San Jose, another Silicon Valley. We can learn from that experience. I would hope we would learn from those lessons that have already been put before us in other parts of California, and make sure that we don't repeat those same mistakes.
I would say from our perspective, part of the reason we are taking our time, it is not as quick as we all would want, is because our purpose is to be planned growth, not explosive growth, right. Which you only get if you take your time. If you rush into it, you will achieve all of those bad things that you have referenced. I think if you take your time, you are strategic in your perspective, and you don't overcommit and overbuild, you will survive this with all sorts of benefits.
I think there's a great need for the liaison with Cal Poly and trying to develop that. But I think there also needs to be a separate group. If we rely on this spaceport consortium to put everything together, we may lose sight. I think that's something that council should discuss, putting together a separate group to make sure that we work in tandem with you guys.
I think we've recommended a very similar perspective already, so good. That would fit right in alignment.
Thank you.
Bill, one thing I had as a question, and as we move forward in the next 6 to 8 months or whatever, maybe we could have an interim report of how things are going. I think what's going to be important is to have assurances, to the public. I've been getting a lot of calls, a lot of issues about the fact that it's going to be so noisy and it's going to be invasive to Paso and all this, which is not true. But on the other hand, I think your studies and findings are going to be very important to the public to understand really what this is and how it's going to help our economy in North County and actually on the Central Coast completely. So is there a way, maybe staff, we could set up something, halfway through or somewhere in there where we can get a report between here and the end of the report?
So the advantage, sir, is that we work at a university and we love to talk. And we'd love to present at any time. And I just committed you to more work, sorry, Elise, but that's the way it goes. And so I know also what I would like is to have our students come up and present, because I think that's where the real benefit is, not just for you, but for the GP, the general public, to hear out of the mouths of those who are the future engineers that they want to stay here and they want to be involved in this in the future.
Very good. I forgot, Councilman Gregory. Steve, do you have any questions for Cal Poly folks?
Yeah, I do have. Well, I have some questions. I don't know who can answer them. I would like to make a polite reminder to everybody. This is a questions first for this part of the segment of the council item. And my question is, the number of $110,000, 171, that number is quite different from what we saw before. Is that a portion of the funds that's going to cost to get the license? It's just a question.
That's the whole value that we've presented. It's a little bit different because we've had to cut a little bit differently on how we run it, but it's really still composed of the same components, which is primarily the ability to pay for our time for leads and time for students and time for professors.
So that's a complete package.
That is a complete package.
Okay, very good. It was a little different before, so I wanted to clarify that. And I'll reserve my comments for after public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Any other questions? I think we're good. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much.
Now we'll open up to public. Anyone wishing to address the council on this item, please stand forward or call in. Melissa, do we have anybody online?
We do have one caller, Jan Albin.
Okay, Jan, if you can hear us, you're welcome. Go ahead.
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. And I apologize. There was a moment or so of silence on my end, so I might have missed the comment earlier. But I have a question about the time frame. That's one. But I also remember that in the beginning of these presentations, when they were talking about applying for the FAA license, we're not guaranteed a license. And so a couple of things I'd like to know is, what is the criteria for being granted a license? That's number one. And secondly, then, if we're not granted a license, do we have a plan B? Is there like, can we apply again, or within a certain time frame? So those are just some of the things I'd like to know, because I'm kind of that person that likes to etch things in stone, and I look at this like it should be etched in stone, but I realize it's not. So what is our plan if we're not granted the FAA license? Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. I will say that initially our city hired Tartaglia and did an initial study and phasing of the possibilities of us moving forward. They saw no roadblocks, but Paul Sloan, if you want to elaborate.
Sure. Great question. Thank you. And I'll start with the response, then pass it over to one of the folks from Cal Poly in more detail. We actually discussed that with Dr. George Nell today in the call that we had with Cal Poly and students. And he said, first of all, it's very important that no two spaceports today are alike. So when you apply for it, that's why the first step is telling the FAA what kind of spaceport that you want to be, because ours is very specific to our infrastructure and our community, et cetera. And then, as Commissioner Britton said, then there's the dialogue back and forth with the FAA to work toward getting it. So to Jan Alvin's question, it's not like check these boxes and you get it. But the number one most important thing is public safety. And so everything has to be, that's the FAA's big thing. So you always do the safety aspects of it. And as you meet those criteria, those are the most important things to the FAA. So then you can work to get it. And our plan B, if in fact, we've always said this, it's not meant to be for us to have a spaceport license. The underlying approach of attracting higher paying technology jobs continues. Space is one sector. It's obviously attracted a lot of attention because of the potential for it. But our plan B, if there was one, would be just to continue what we're doing, is to try and attract those. Still working with Cal Poly. Like I said, they have 15 different engineering degrees they offer. But if we can go forward with this, as Mayor Pro Tem Hammond said, the preliminary technical review from Tartaglia Engineering found no fatal flaws. And so we'll begin the process, and it's a dialogue back and forth with the FAA. So that, and if you guys want to add anything, I've rambled well.
Good. All right, thank you, Paul. Sure. Councilman Boucher.
A segue to that question, Paul. The item number 7 on the council agenda report. The contract will be executed by and administered by Cal Poly Corporation. The performing institution is the California Polytechnic State University. Can you clarify that, please?
I will let the Vice President of Cal Poly clarify that, because that's something we all learned in this process.
Thank you.
So Cal Poly is a state academic institution, is not therefore allowed to enter into contracts and do negotiations as such, only for services rendered to the university. Therefore, in order to do business outside external of the university has created the Cal Poly Corporation, which is a 503c, which allows it to do private contracts with private entities outside of the entity. We then work with the internal entity from Cal Poly State side to the Cal Poly Corporation side, and they handle all the books, all the academics, all the pay, all that other things. That all goes through them so that we can still do business with outside agencies and organizations. I dare not use the word shell, but, you know, think out loud and it could come out.
Great.
Anything else?
Thank you, Bill.
All right.
Any other questions, Council? Bring it back then for discussion and or action. Councilman Schramm.
In discussion, I was making the allusion to Silicon Valley. But bear in mind that the beginning of Silicon Valley was siliconics. It was little transistors that used silicon very extensively to create a new growing electrical industry, electronics industry. But that was just one hub, because then we had things like Memorex, Tempus Research, many other aspects. So even if we get this, we're just part of one little part of a hub that spans the whole entire globe, and further than that, possibly out into space. But we'll just be attracting some things. It doesn't mean we're going to explode and become the whole ball of wax. We're not going to have millions of people coming into Paso Robles to want to live here and work here. They'll be working in Indiana. They'll be working in South Carolina. They'll be working in Texas, in Florida, in England, in Germany. in China, perhaps, because we're all in this together. This world is part of a universe. And this is what the federal government and many of our state governments are now looking at for a lot of their major grant opportunities. And that is because what they're looking for the next Silicon Valley experience. And the next Silicon Valley experience is outside of this world, but it's going to be based in this world. So this is great, and I fully support this.
I had a question. Steve Gregory, as I remember, when I first viewed this proposal, it was 110,000. Did you recall a different number?
I thought we were talking around the $500,000 level, but that was just discussion. It was never in writing. So I'm okay with this number. Can I continue talking about that?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I would like to make a motion, but what I want to do before I make the motion, I think it's really important. Both Chris Bosch and Bill are working on a group to discuss the effects of this spaceport. Eventually, all the effects that are going to be creating on our community. So, in addition to, and this is a question maybe for our city attorney, I think I'd like to see this motion go through, but I'd also like to add staff direction so that we can continue the conversation where Chris Bosch and Bill were both discussing about our community being able to basically understand and deal with a lot of the amenities and the amount of businesses and activities going on around Spaceport. So I'd be ready to make a motion, but I'd like to also be able to provide staff direction. Elizabeth, is that something we could do outside of the motion?
Yeah, absolutely. So you would just make the motion to approve the agreement, move staff recommendation, and then add additional direction to staff to, report back to you, continue to work with the community, whatever you think is appropriate. But that's certainly related to the item and well within our ability to do tonight.
Okay, so I'm ready to take a crack at a motion, Mayor Hammond, if if everybody's finished talking.
Stand by, Steve. Chris, do you have any other questions or comments? Okay.
We've got all the public comment that we're going to have.
Yeah, Steve, go ahead then. Make your motion.
All right, so the first item, I move that we approve the agreement with Cal Poly Corporation not to exceed, I hope I'm doing this right, yes, in the amount of $110,171 for spaceport license application work. And in addition to the motion, I would just like to have our staff direction. Do you want me to, Elizabeth, should I make that outside of the motion?
Yeah, so if we could do the first motion being to approve resolution 22XXX authorizing the city manager to execute the agreement in a not to exceed amount of $171, okay, and finding the action exempt from CEQA pursuant to state CEQA guideline section 15306 as the first action, and then make a second action related to the direction to staff.
Very good. So I will make that motion that Elizabeth just stated, and I'll hold from there. I move to approve that.
Second.
Okay, motion by, second by Councilman Bausch and the first by Councilman Gregory. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Gregory?
Yes.
Councilmember Bausch?
Aye.
Councilmember Strong?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Hammond?
Aye. And go ahead with your second motion, Steve.
And the motion carries 4-0.
Okay. So, Chris and Bill, if we should probably involve everybody in the conversation, but I think we should direct staff to leave an open dialogue and create a consistent dialogue, both with our staff, our council, and Cal Poly, and then also I think it's really important. Communication and public awareness are real critical to me in this whole setup, so that we have full disclosure and we can get the reporting back on a regular basis like Mayor Hammond recommended. So I'd like to recommend that we have our staff have an open line of communication. I don't know if you want to make a committee. Committees are an overused word in my opinion, but I'd like to be able to have that constant communication so that we can have access to see what's going on and take the steps necessary to encourage the completion of the spaceport process.
Well, question, Steve. Mayor Martin and myself are, I believe, the ad hoc for this item. Would
Okay.
that be sufficient then, as far as a group?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. And,
Okay.
But I'd like to also have, Cal Poly, if they've created some kind of a body to help administrate this process, take their information too and combine the two of you guys.
Okay. So if we've got that understanding of the motion handled, essentially.
Mr. Hammond?
It was kind of long and lengthy there, Steve, but essentially you want to have staff and council involvement in bringing back reports essentially through the process.
Or is that a receiving reports?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's simplify this. Why don't we just, motion is let's have the city council ad hoc work with the group from Cal Poly, the administrative group or whatever body that is, to continue giving us information and detail on the process.
Great. Okay, then we'll report back to full council on
Yes.
a normal basis.
Mr. Hammond, just by way of reference too, this is going to be a very layered approach to, eventually establishing a spaceport if that's what council does, including involvement with the airport commission for uses out there, recommendations that will be brought forward to the council. Those will likely be heavily reliant upon recommendations by Cal Poly, as well as, of course, the FAA and other regulators within the area. There'll be business plans. There'll be all kinds of things that will keep council engaged along with the community. I envision that there will be workshops. There'll be a lot of decision points and pivot points that will require significant public input, as well as council and airport commission decision making as well.
Yeah, and that's what I was kind of alluding to with my question to Bill, that I've been getting a lot of comment from public, basically concerned about the actual spaceport effort. But I think the more information we get out there, the better, which is what I think Gregory was trying to do.
And I'll second his motion.
Okay, second price, Strong.
Just, Mr. Hammond, just so I can be clear, so the motion is to continue to utilize the existing ad hoc, but direct staff to continue to work with and engage with the community and report back regularly to the council.
Yes.
Councilman Gregory, is that kind of what your intent is?
Well, also Cal Poly has created a group of people to help us do this too. So I want to make sure we integrate Cal Poly's process.
Okay.
Okay.
Motion by Councilman Gregory and second by Councilman Strong.
Comment. So we have a spaceport. If I understand correctly, the ad hoc committee is talking about the nexus of a spaceport. I'd like to also include, if it's approved by the maker of the motion and by Mr. Strong, to look outside of just that creation. What are other, what should staff be bringing back to council that will need to be considered at these kinds of committees that Mr. Lewis has brought up? I'd like to think about those now, start thinking about them now.
So what I would recommend then, maybe with your conversations with the city manager, get that information to him so he can direct it back to the ad hoc Brown Act kind of situation. In other words, if you have a certain question or certain thing you want us to get involved with,
certainly
funnel it through the hub, which is Tylos. All right.
Very good.
If I may, I would envision that this is the report back. And that report back, we will then use and evaluate the same things you're talking about, which are much broader and are just our general counsel objective and process and anything. But let's not tie it up in knots.
Well, but if there's some, I think I see what Chris is saying. If there's something else that he wants us to investigate or work on, then certainly we can.
Then come back to us, but it doesn't have to necessarily involve all these same people.
Chris?
But without belaboring the point, it may involve, if this happens, then this is going to happen. How do we mitigate those circumstances?
Right.
And I understand your point about being part of the broader responsibility of the council. But I think we'll just need to move forward and keep. I'll bring those concerns up back to city manager and bring them back to the council that way.
Very good. All right, then we'll call for the question. Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Gregory?
Aye.
Councilmember Strong?
Aye.
Councilmember Walsh?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Hammond?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0.
Very good. Moving on, we have then concluded our discussion items. Now we're up to the city manager report. Ty Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond. I don't have anything extensive today, but I would, with the council's indulgence, like to show you and the audience this book. So this, I don't know how many of you have seen this. What I'm holding up is a document that goes back to 1895. I talked to Mr. Strong about this a little bit ago, and he thought it might be a good idea to bring one of these to the council meeting. So as part of our recent City Hall cleanup, I got to go through a whole bunch of documents. I know that I'm a newer city manager, and you know, I've heard conversations about when President of the United States, you know, gets to all these secret files, Area 52 and all these different things. This is what I got access to.
All right.
So I thought I would go back to December 6, 1895. And this is a handwritten ledger of what happened at the Board of Trustees meeting back in 1895 as a way to wrap up tonight's meeting since it's a lighter agenda. And some of the facts, I won't read it all verbatim, but it is all handwritten. It went through and we got to hear reports from the city marshal, the city clerk, and the city recorder as well. So there was different levels within the city. And here's some of the expenses that they approved that evening. The flour company got $39, which was approved. There was also the water company that got $15.75. JB Fry, who I have no idea who that is, $28, as well as the local hotel, which was called the Central Hotel, got $8. And also moving forward is when some of the issues that we still deal with today, their council at that time debated on whether they should put sidewalks in throughout the city. And if so, what should those sidewalks look like and who should pay for them? So
still working on
frontage
that
improvements. Frontage improvements were a big deal back then, whether they should be concrete, stone. In fact, it got down to the type of stone, but due to the clerk's writing, I couldn't tell you what it was. But I thought this was a great way to wrap up the evening, you know, some 100 plus years later.
Do we have access to that book upstairs somewhere?
I would love to show it to you. Obviously, we won't let it leave the building.
No,
it's,
not at all. No.
It's under lock
There
and
are
key,
special
but,
handling gloves in the executive conference room upstairs, which is where they're kept. So if you are going to touch them, there's
unlike
some
I'm doing
protocol
right now
involved.
with my bare hands.
Cool. Thank you, Melissa.
But perhaps you're going to consider microfilming them?
Yeah, that'd be interesting so public can see things. Yeah.
They're beautiful documents, though, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Ty Lewis. All right, item 12, current council committee activities and reports. Who would like to start? Chris, Belch?
I'm not on any committees or activities. Activities I have two. Youth Commission on 11/17, I was absolutely blown away by the applicants. Just some exceptional students that reside here in Paso Robles. Some of them go to Paso High, some of them attend Mission. They all seem to outshine each other. It was just a great moment. I think we had originally 16 or 17 applicants, not quite all of them showed. We had some very young applicants to seniors. As we try to get the Youth Commission restarted, I think they'll bring fresh vision and kind of a new sense of purpose of what our Youth Commission can do without the limitations of past practice. To the young folks that weren't selected this time around, I would certainly encourage them to come back and try again. There'll be plenty of room as we move forward. And then the Christmas parade, thank you very much to Main Street for hosting the Christmas parade. In spite of the weather, what a treat. Just, this is quintessential Paso Robles. This is what we do here best, is we come together as a community and celebrate. So thank you very much to everyone who was involved in the Christmas parade.
Okay, Councilman Strong.
Well, thank you. Well, I participated in many of the same things of our various events, but I also represent our region at the state level, and at that time I attended a meeting on November 29th in San Jose as the chairman and president for all the regional governments of California, and it was our annual election meeting. So I am now the past chairman, and I passed the baton on to a very fine gentleman from Southern California. And one of the things that we discussed was our legislative activities and how we had to move forward, again, stressing more and more, we, not me, because me is not well received when you're seeking money, seeking grants, seeking approvals. We is very well received because people like to see people working together and see a broader effect of the money that they're going to give out. So that relates to many of our projects here and how they relate to inland and how they relate to the coast, how they relate north and south, et cetera. And I might even say that it would probably be a very good thing for our spaceport, which relates to just about everybody on Earth. So these are wonderful things. We did discuss an upcoming meeting that's going to be in San Bernardino, and we're trying to get a broader attendance because it'll also be the beginning of this year's school that we run, that organization runs, training all the middle management people for Caltrans and the State Department of Transportation. And those people get all of their training for middle management through our school that we run through CalCog. And it would be a chance for people to see the school, meet the candidates, get to know some of the people at the state level better. So that was a very successful meeting. And then also we had a rail board meeting this morning that I'm on the board of, former chairman, and that approved the EIR for the San Luis Obispo transfer facility that is under construction, and that is going to utilize in its fourth phase. It's about $5 million. We did have some sensitive issues that we've tried to deal with, having to do with a bike path, having to do with noise. We went ahead and approved the project. San Luis Obispo was very concerned about future noise, but the concerns they had were too early to really try to talk about mitigating or having any definitive action because we're moving to electrification. We're changing the entire noise profile over the next 3 to 5 years. And a lot of the concerns they had now can't even be measured yet until those things happen. So we will be working on that and working closely with the city as this develops so that we can improve train transportation north, south, and south through our area and actually have a much better effect on the environment by taking more cars off the road and putting people on the train. And that's all done to now. Tomorrow I'll be at the SLOCOG and we'll be discussing some of these same issues.
Thank you, Councilman Strong. Councilman Gregory?
Yes, I'd like to mirror some of the remarks from Mr. Bausch. The Youth Commission meeting was extraordinary, and it's so encouraging to see so much youth interested in being part of the city process and contributing something to their community through that. And it was just a really great process. And I will encourage all the ones that didn't get appointed to please try again. I'd also like to thank the entire community of Paso Robles. Not very many communities come out in the pouring rain to an event like we did on Saturday night, but it was a Saturday or Friday? I can't remember which night it was, but it was so amazing to see everybody who came out, including John's wife driving the trolley, pulling it up the road. And it was just so much fun to see everybody out and just being part of Paso Robles and having fun and in big rigs and fire trucks and marching bands and Mini Cooper rallies. It was amazing. So I really appreciate the whole community. I want to say thank you to everybody involved in that. And finally, I'd like to end my comments tonight thanking Cal Poly and Mr. Bill Britton for making and helping us through this very, very technical process and really bringing a dream of Mayor Martin and all of ours true to really get close to the spaceport reality. I couldn't be prouder of our city working with Cal Poly and encouraging Mr. Britton to get on the Airport Commission. Thank you all for what you're doing for us. And we really appreciate the students' efforts and everything the university is doing to make this happen for us. And it really is drawing us very close to Cal Poly. We always have been, but this is really helping our city a great deal for the future. And I just want to say thank you to Cal Poly and thank you to our staff with all the engagement and working with Cal Poly this process. And I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of everybody. So I just want to end up by saying thank you. That's it for me.
All right. Thank you, Steve. For me, the main meeting I had since our last was APCD, San Luis Obispo County. Nothing really major to report on that. Also, I want to also thank Main Street for putting on the parade. I mean, it just, I think everybody was so glad to see it raining that it didn't matter whether you got wet or not, you know. And I had a major problem with my old Mack engine for the Children's Museum. It didn't want to keep running. But other than that, it was a great event. Again, I appreciate everybody and staff as well. I know we had a lot of our city people out there taking care of the street corners and things like that. When you have an event down the middle of the street, you know, you got to protect the public as much as possible, and it's really critical to do that. Also, we have an upcoming event that it wasn't listed here too. We have Vine Street Showcase coming up this Saturday, the 10th. Got to have that on everybody's radar too. So beyond that, upcoming events, we have Paso Robles Youth Commission meeting starting tomorrow. I think we're the first one. Chris, you're on that. December 7th at 5 p.m. And that's good, I think, at the Centennial. It's where they used to have it. It's where I used to go anyway, so Centennial Park. Airport Commission is this Thursday night, December 8th, 6:30. Development Review Committee is Monday, next Monday, the 12th at 3:30 here in the City Hall. Planning Commission meeting is the following Tuesday, 13th. Development Review Committee, Monday again, the 19th, 3:30. City Council meeting, of course, is going to be our next one on the December 20th. And we were supposed to be actually sworn in tonight. Ty, you want to give a little report on that because we couldn't do it?
Yeah, that was the plan, Mr. Hammond. However, the certification hasn't been finalized. The clerk's office might be able to give us an update, but I believe that they're expecting the count to be wrapped up sometime tomorrow with the results being delivered to Sacramento on the 8th. So
Okay.
That's the delay.
Okay, very good. Any other comments for?
I was remiss in not mentioning Main Street and the tree lighting and the Christmas caroling the week previous. Again, I think there was a record crowd. I don't think I've seen that many people show up to our downtown tree lighting, and it was an awesome thing to see. And then last but not least, new time for the Youth Commission meeting. Used to meet at 3 in the afternoon and now meets at 5 and still meets at Centennial.
Very good.
Thank you.
All right. So I'd like to go ahead and make a comment, final comment. Kind of hard with regard to dedicating a meeting like this, but really dear friend, Patty Strong has passed away, Fred's wife, after so many years of service to, you know, behind the councilmen, the people who are elected to do things, there's always the wives, there's always the families that put out a lot to keep us going, and it's the better half, basically. I think Patty passed away last week. Sorry to hear that, Fred. And Colleen, his daughter, is here too tonight. So I'd like to go ahead, if I would, make a motion to dedicate this meeting in the name of Patty Strong. So.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.